Hey there, you awesome viewer. Yep, that's you, I'm talking right to you. Before we jump into this crazy, wild story, I've got a quick question for you to think about. Have you ever met someone so nosy they'd call the cops over something totally silly? Like, maybe they didn't like your bike or your dog's bark. I bet you've got a story. Drop your answer down in the comments below, I really want to read it. Oh, and while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from today. Are you at home? At school? Somewhere super cool? Let me know. And hey, if you love wild, funny stories like the one I'm about to tell you, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming, it's about to get so good. Okay, let's set the scene. Picture this, it's a bright, sunny afternoon in a little neighborhood where everything looks perfect. The sun is shining high in the sky, making everything warm and happy. Birds are chirping their little songs, tweet, 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 like they're having a party up in the trees. The grass on all the lawns is cut nice and short, so it looks like a big green carpet. The houses are neat, with pretty flowers in the yards and clean mailboxes standing like little soldiers by the road. It's the kind of place where you'd think nothing exciting ever happens. But guess what? Something huge is about to go down, and I'm right in the middle of it. So, who am I? Hi, I'm Jake. I'm just a regular guy, nothing fancy about me. I live in this quiet neighborhood, and I've got a tiny friend who sits by my front porch every single day. His name's Norman, and he's a garden gnome. Yep, a little statue guy. He's not tall, just about as big as a soccer ball. Norman's got a goofy red hat that flops over a little, and a big, silly grin on his face like he's laughing at a secret joke. His little hands rest on his round belly, and he's painted all bright and cheerful: red hat, blue shirt, white beard. He sits there by my front door, right next to the steps, just chilling out and watching the world go by. Norman doesn't talk, of course he's a statue, but I like having him around. He makes my house feel fun and friendly. I put Norman out there because I thought he was cute. I mean, who doesn't like a happy little gnome, right? He's not hurting anybody, just sitting there with his big grin, soaking up the sunshine. I figured everyone would smile when they saw him. Most people did. My neighbors would walk by and wave, or they'd say, "Hey, Jake, love that gnome." Kids would giggle and point at his funny hat. It was great. Norman was like my little buddy who made everyone happy. Well, almost everyone. Because there was one person who didn't like Norman at all. And her name was Karen. Now, let me tell you about Karen. Oh boy, Karen was something else. She wasn't just any neighbor, she was the HOA queen. HOA stands for Homeowners Association, which is like a group of people who make rules for the neighborhood. They decide stuff like how tall your grass can be or what color your house can be painted. It's supposed to keep everything nice, but Karen? She took it way too far. She acted like she was the boss of the whole street, like she owned every single house and yard. Karen was tall and loud, with a big clipboard she carried everywhere. That clipboard was her weapon. She'd write down anything she didn't like, and then she'd boss people around about it. Karen had short, spiky hair that was always perfect, and she wore fancy sunglasses even when it wasn't sunny. She'd march up and down the street in her shiny shoes, looking for trouble. If your bush was too big, she'd yell, "Trim that bush right now." If your mailbox had a tiny scratch, she'd shout, "Paint that mailbox, it's ugly." If your dog barked once, she'd glare and say, "Quiet that mutt." Nobody dared to argue with her. If you tried, she'd just talk louder and wave that clipboard in your face until you gave up. Everyone was scared of Karen, well, everyone except me. I wasn't about to let her boss me around. And that's where the trouble started. See, the very first day I moved into my house, Karen came stomping over. I was still unpacking boxes, sweaty and tired, when I heard her loud voice. "Hey, you," she barked. I looked up, and there she was, standing on my lawn with her clipboard, glaring at Norman like he'd just robbed a bank. "What is that thing?" she said, pointing at my gnome. I smiled and said, "Oh, that's Norman. He's my garden gnome." Cool, right? But Karen didn't think he was cool. Not one bit. Her face scrunched up like she'd smelled something stinky, and she said, "That thing is hideous. It's against the rules. Take it down." I laughed a little because I thought she was joking. A gnome breaking rules? That's silly. But Karen wasn't laughing. She tapped her clipboard with her pen and said, I'm serious. The HOA says no ugly statues. Get rid of it, or you'll be sorry. I just shrugged and said, nah, Norman's staying. He's not hurting anybody. Oh man, you should have seen her. Her eyes got wide, and her cheeks turned all red. She looked like a tomato about to explode. We'll see about that, she snapped, then turned around and marched off, her shoes clicking on the sidewalk. I figured she'd get over it. Spoiler alert, she didn't. From that day on, Karen had it out for me and Norman. She'd walk by my house every day, giving us the stink eye. That's when you look at someone all mean and grumpy, like you're mad at them for no reason. She'd stop and stare at Norman, scribbling stuff on her clipboard. Sometimes she'd mutter things under her breath, like, disgraceful, or this street is ruined. I'd just wave at her from my porch and say, hey, Karen. Nice day, huh? That made her even madder. She'd huff and puff and storm off, like a big, angry cloud. It was kind of funny, but it was also the start of something bigger than she ever guessed. Here's the fun part, though, Karen didn't know I had a secret. Yep, a big, juicy secret up my sleeve. I wasn't just some guy with a gnome. I was something else, something she'd never see coming in a million years. She thought she was so smart, bossing everyone around, but I had a trick that was going to turn everything upside down. What was my secret? Oh, I can't tell you yet. That'd ruin the fun. But don't worry, I'll spill it soon. All you need to know right now is that Karen was picking a fight with the wrong guy. And Norman? He was part of it too, in his own little way. Let's rewind a bit, because I want you to really see how this all started. That sunny afternoon I told you about? That's when things kicked off. I was sitting on my porch, sipping some lemonade, just enjoying the day. Norman was right there next to me, his red hat shining in the sun. Across the street, I could see Karen's house. It was the fanciest one on the block, big windows, perfect flowers, not a speck of dirt anywhere. She was out there, watering her roses, but her eyes kept darting over to my yard. I could tell she was plotting something. Her lips were all tight, like she was biting back a yell. I just waved at her again, all friendly-like, and took another sip of my drink. Norman's grin seemed extra big that day, like he knew trouble was coming. And trouble did come, oh boy, did it ever. Karen wasn't just annoyed about Norman. She was obsessed. She started telling everyone in the neighborhood about that awful gnome guy. That's me. She'd stop people on their walks and say, can you believe he won't take it down? It's ruining our street. Most folks just nodded and kept walking, because they didn't want to deal with her. But I heard the whispers. My neighbor Tom, who's a nice guy with a big dog, told me, Jake, she's on a mission. Watch out. I just laughed and said, let her try. Norman's not going anywhere. Days went by, and Karen kept up her grumpy act. She'd knock on my door sometimes, holding her clipboard like it was a shield. Last chance, she'd say. Take that gnome away, or I'll make you regret it. I'd lean on my door frame, all calm, and say, Karen, he's staying. Why do you care so much? That drove her nuts. She'd stomp her foot and say, because I run this place. I make the rules. Then she'd march off again, plotting her next move. I'd just shake my head and pat Norman's hat. Hang in there, buddy, I'd tell him. She's got no idea what's coming. Now, let's talk about that neighborhood a little more, because it's important. It wasn't a big place, just one long street with houses on both sides. Kids rode bikes up and down the sidewalk, laughing and yelling. Old Mr. Jenkins would sit on his porch every day, reading his newspaper. Mrs. Lopez next door grew tomatoes so red they looked like little suns. It was a happy spot, or it used to be before Karen started throwing her weight around. She'd been the HOA boss for years, and people were tired of her. But nobody stood up to her. Nobody except me, that is. And that's why the story gets so wild. See, I wasn't scared of Karen. Sure, she was loud and mean, but I had something she didn't, a secret that made me smile every time she yelled. I'd watch her strut around, thinking she was the queen, and I'd think, oh, Karen, you're in for a surprise. I didn't tell anyone, not even Tom or Mrs. Lopez. It was just me and Norman, holding onto this big, awesome twist. What was it? Well, imagine something so cool it'd make your jaw drop. That's what I had up my sleeve. But I couldn't spill it yet, not when Karen was still acting like she owned the world. That sunny afternoon kept rolling along, all peaceful and nice. Birds kept singing, the sun kept shining, and Norman kept grinning. I finished my lemonade and stretched out on my porch chair, feeling good. Across the street, Karen put down her watering can and grabbed her clipboard again. She started writing something, her pen moving fast. I could almost hear her muttering, "Stupid gnome, stupid Jake." I didn't care. I just sat there, letting her stew. She had no clue what was waiting for her, no clue at all. And that's where the story starts to heat up. Because Karen wasn't just gonna grumble forever. She was gonna do something big, something crazy, and it was gonna backfire in the funniest way. What did she do? How did my secret come out? Oh, it's so good you're gonna love it. But I can't tell you yet. This is just the beginning, the part where you get hooked. You're probably wondering, what's Jake hiding? Why's he so chill about Karen? Good questions. Stick around, because this tale's about to flip upside down, and you won't believe what happens next. So, what do you think so far? Is Karen sounding like someone you'd want to avoid? Or maybe you've got a Karen in your life too? Tell me in the comments, I'm dying to know. And don't forget to guess, what's my secret? Something funny? Something sneaky? Drop your ideas below, and let's see who gets close. This story's just getting started, and trust me, it's gonna be a wild ride. Norman and I? We're ready. Are you? Okay, so here's where things start getting juicy. Karen had it out for me from day one, like, the very first second I rolled into the neighborhood with my moving boxes and my little buddy Norman, she was already mad. Picture this, I'm unpacking my stuff, all sweaty and tired from carrying chairs and lamps into my new house. The sun's shining, birds are chirping, and I'm feeling pretty good about my new place. Then, out of nowhere, here comes Karen. She's marching across my lawn like she owns it, her nose stuck way up in the air like she's sniffing for trouble. In her hands, that big, scary clipboard she always carries. She stops right in front of me, looks down at Norman sitting by my porch, and says in her loud, bossy voice, that gnome is an eyesore. It's against the rules. Now, let me remind you who Norman is. He's my garden gnome, a little statue guy with a goofy red hat, a white beard, and a big, happy grin. He's not big, just about the size of a basketball, and he sits there all quiet and friendly. I love Norman, he's like my little porch pal. So when Karen said that, I just smiled at her, nice and calm, and said, Norman's staying, Karen. He's family. Oh man, you should have seen her face. It turned redder than Norman's hat, like, bright, tomato red. Her eyes got all squinty, and her mouth opened like she was gonna yell some more, but instead she just huffed. You know that sound like a big puff of air when someone's super mad? That's what she did. Then she muttered something about standards and fines, spun around, and stomped off back to her house, her shoes making loud clacks on the sidewalk. I stood there, watching her go, and thought, okay, that's that. She's mad, but she'll get over it? Nope. I was so wrong. That wasn't the end of it, not even close. Karen didn't just forget about Norman and me. She turned into my own personal grumpy shadow. She started watching me like a hawk, you know, those big birds that sit up high and stare at everything. That was Karen. Every day, I'd catch her peeking through her blinds. Her house is right across the street from mine, with those big, shiny windows, and I'd see her standing there, holding those blinds open just a tiny bit, staring at my yard. Sometimes I'd wave at her, all friendly like, and she'd yank the blinds shut real fast, like she didn't want me to know she was spying. But I knew. Oh, I totally knew. And it wasn't just peeking. She started scribbling notes, tons of them. I'd see her with that clipboard, her pen moving super quick, writing stuff down while she glared at Norman. What was she writing? I had no idea, but it couldn't be good. One time, I was watering my flowers, just minding my own business, and I looked up to see her standing on her porch, snapping pictures of my yard with her phone. Click, click, click. She didn't even try to hide it. She just stood there, taking photo after photo of Norman, like he was some kind of criminal. It was creepy, super creepy, but I didn't say anything. I just kept watering my flowers, pretending I didn't see her. Inside, though, I was thinking, wow, this lady's nuts. But I let it slide. I didn't want to start a big fight, not yet, anyway. Karen didn't stop there, though. She didn't just hate Norman, she started picking on everybody. One day, I saw something that really got me steamed. I was out on my porch, sipping some juice, when I heard her voice loud and mean, like always. I looked over, and there she was, yelling at my neighbor's kid. His name's Timmy, and he's this little guy, maybe 7 years old, with a bright blue bike he loves to ride. Timmy was pedaling up and down the sidewalk, laughing and having fun, when Karen stormed out of her house. "Hey," she screeched, pointing at him. "You're riding that bike too loud. This is my street, and I won't have it." "Too loud? A bike? I mean, come on, it's just a kid riding around." But Karen didn't care. She kept yelling, her arms waving all crazy, and poor Timmy's face went all scared. He dropped his bike right there on the sidewalk and ran off crying, his little legs moving as fast as they could. I watched the whole thing from my porch, my juice glass in my hand, and thought, man, this lady's got some nerve. Who yells at a kid like that? Who says a bike is too loud? Karen, that's who. She stood there after Timmy ran off, hands on her hips, looking proud of herself like she'd just won a big prize. I could feel my tummy getting all tight and mad, but I stayed quiet. I didn't jump up and yell back. I didn't march over and tell her off. Nope, I kept my cool. I just sat there, watching her strut back to her house like she was the queen of everything. But inside my head, I was thinking, oh, Karen, you're picking on the wrong people. See, here's the thing, little did Karen know, I wasn't just some guy with a gnome. Nope, not even close. I had something big, something huge that she'd never suspect in a million years. She thought I was just Jake, the new guy who wouldn't listen to her rules. She thought she could boss me around, scare me with her clipboard and her mean stares. But I had a secret, a super cool secret, and it was gonna change everything. Can you guess what it was? Go ahead, take a wild guess. Was I a superhero? A spy? A wizard? Ha, I'm not telling yet. Don't worry, though I'll spill it soon, and when I do, your eyes are gonna get super big. For now, just know that Karen was messing with the wrong dude, and I was ready to wait it out. Let's back up a little, because I want you to really feel how annoying Karen was. After that first day when she yelled about Norman, she didn't let up, not even for a second. Every single day, she'd find some way to bug me. One time, I was raking leaves in my yard nice and quiet, just cleaning up, and she popped out of nowhere. "Those leaves are too messy," she shouted from across the street. "You're ruining the neighborhood." I looked at my pile of leaves all neat and tidy and then at her. "Karen," I said, all calm, "they're just leaves. I'm cleaning them up." But she didn't care. She wrote something on her clipboard, shook her head, and walked away muttering about standards again. Standards? For leaves? She was bananas. Another day, I was painting my mailbox. It was a little scratched up, so I got some blue paint, bright and fun, and started fixing it. Guess who showed up? Yep, Karen. She marched over, her sunglasses shining in the sun, and said, "That color's against the rules. Mailboxes have to be black or white." I looked at her, paintbrush in my hand, and said, "It's just a mailbox, Karen. It's fine." Her face got all twisty, like she'd bitten a sour lemon, and she snapped, "You'll get a fine for this." Then she stomped off again. A fine? For a blue mailbox? I laughed a little and kept painting. Norman sat there watching, his grin as big as ever, like he was cheering me on. She kept doing stuff like that, watching, yelling, writing notes. One morning, I caught her sneaking around my yard before the sun was even up. I peeked out my window, still in my pajamas, and saw her tiptoeing near my porch with a flashlight. She was shining it on Norman, taking more pictures. I rubbed my eyes, thinking, is this lady for real? She didn't see me watching, so I just went back to bed. But it was getting weirder every day. She was like a detective, but a grumpy, mean one who hated gnomes instead of solving crimes. And it wasn't just me she bugged. She picked on everybody. After she scared Timmy off his bike, I started noticing more. Like, one afternoon, old Mr. Jenkins, you know, the guy who reads his newspaper on his porch, he was out there with his coffee, all peaceful. Karen walked by and yelled, "Your chair's too close to the sidewalk. Move it back." Mr. Jenkins looked confused, but he just nodded and dragged his chair a little farther back. Another time, Mrs. Lopez was picking her tomatoes, those bright red ones, and Karen shouted, "Those plants are too tall. Cut them down." Mrs. Lopez frowned but didn't say anything. Karen was like a big, loud bully, bossing everyone around, and people just let her do it because they were tired of fighting. But me? I wasn't tired. I wasn't scared. I'd sit on my porch with Norman, watching her run around like a chicken with no head, and I'd smile. Why? Because I knew something she didn't. That secret I keep hinting at? It was big, and it was gonna flip this whole story upside down. Karen thought she was winning, thought she could scare me into moving Norman or painting my mailbox black. She thought I was just some guy she could push around. But I wasn't. I was Jake with a plan. And every time she yelled or spied or wrote her silly notes, I got a little closer to showing her who I really was. Let's talk about one more day, because this one was wild. It was a Saturday, all sunny and warm, and I was outside playing catch with Timmy. He'd gotten over the bike thing and wanted to toss a ball around, so we were in my yard, laughing and having fun. Norman was right there, chilling by the porch like always. Then bam, here comes Karen. She storms over, her clipboard flapping in the wind, and yells, "You're making too much noise. And that gnome is still here." I caught the ball, looked at her, and said, "Karen, we're just playing." And Norman's not moving. Timmy hid behind me, peeking out, and Karen pointed at him. "You're both trouble," she snapped. "I'm reporting this." "Reporting us? For playing catch?" I rolled my eyes and said, "Go ahead, Karen. Do what you gotta do." She glared at me, her face all red again, and marched off. Timmy whispered, "She's mean." I nodded and said, "Yep, but don't worry. She's not as tough as she thinks." He smiled a little, and we kept playing. But inside, I was thinking, "Oh, Karen, you're digging a big hole for yourself." So that's how it went day after day of Karen being a huge pain. She watched me, yelled at me, spied on me, and tried to boss me around. She yelled at Timmy, Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Lopez, everybody. She thought she was the queen of the street, and we were all supposed to bow down to her and her clipboard. But I didn't bow. I didn't budge. I kept Norman right where he was, and I kept my cool. Why? Because I had that secret, something so awesome it made all her nonsense funny to me. What was it? Oh, you're dying to know, aren't you? Don't worry, I'll tell you soon. For now, just imagine Karen stomping around, thinking she's winning, while I'm sitting there with Norman, knowing the real game hasn't even started yet. What do you think my secret could be? Something sneaky? Something funny? Something that'd make Karen's jaw drop? Guess in your head or tell me later in the comments. This tension, this fight with Karen, it's all building up to something huge. She had no idea what was coming, and I was ready to let it roll. Stick with me, because this story's about to get even crazier. Alright, things are heating up now. Days turned into weeks, and Karen didn't just stay grumpy, she got worse. Way worse. At first, it was just her staring at me and Norman, my little garden gnome with the red hat and big grin, like we were the worst things ever. But then she started doing mean stuff that made me shake my head and wonder, what's wrong with this lady? Let me tell you all about it, step by step, because it's wild. One morning, I stepped outside to grab my newspaper, and there it was, a nasty note taped right on my front door. It was written in big, angry letters with a black marker, "Remove that hideous statue or else." Yep, she was talking about Norman again. That little guy was just sitting there by my porch, smiling like always, not bothering a soul. But to Karen? He was hideous. That's a fancy word for super ugly. I read the note, laughed a little, and crumpled it up. Nice try, Karen, I said to myself, tossing it in the trash. I wasn't moving Norman for anything. He was my buddy. But Karen didn't stop with one note. Oh no, she kept going. The next day, another note showed up, that gnome is a disgrace. Get rid of it. The day after that. You're breaking the rules. Take it down. Every morning, I'd find a new one, all mean and bossy, stuck to my door with tape. She must have snuck over at night to do it, because I never caught her in the act. I'd just rip them off, throw them away, and go about my day. Norman stayed right where he was, grinning away, like he was laughing at her too. Karen probably thought her notes would scare me, but they didn't. They just made me roll my eyes. Then she took it up a notch way up. One afternoon, I came home from the store, carrying a bag of apples, and saw something crazy. My mailbox, the one I'd painted blue just to bug her, was lying on the ground, all smashed up. It wasn't just tipped over, it looked like someone had kicked it hard. The pole was bent, and the little door was hanging off. I set my apples down and scratched my head, thinking, what happened here? Then I looked across the street, and there was Karen, standing on her porch with a big smirk on her face. You know, that sneaky smile people get when they've done something naughty and think they're clever? That was her. Hey, Karen. I called out, waving like nothing was wrong. Did you see who knocked over my mailbox? She crossed her arms and shouted back, oh, it must have been vandals. This neighborhood's going downhill because of people like you. Vandals. That's what you call bad kids who break stuff for fun. But I didn't buy it, not for a second. I knew it was her. She hated that blue mailbox almost as much as she hated Norman, and I bet she'd snuck over and kicked it down herself. Did I yell at her? Nope. Did I call her out? Not yet. I just smiled, picked up my apples, and said, guess I'll fix it then. Then I went inside. She stood there, smirking away, thinking she'd won. But I wasn't mad, I was calm. Too calm, maybe, because I had a secret she didn't know about. More on that later. So, I fixed my mailbox. I got a hammer and some nails, straightened the pole, and painted it blue again, extra bright this time, just to make her squirm. When I was done, I set it back up, nice and tall, right where it belonged. Karen watched from her window, peeking through those blinds like always, and I gave her a big wave. Looks good, huh? I called out. She didn't answer, just yanked the blinds shut. I chuckled and patted Norman's hat. We're tougher than she thinks, I told him. He didn't say anything, of course he's a statue, but his grin made me feel like he agreed. Here's where it gets sneaky, though. While Karen was busy being mean to me, I started watching her too. Yep, two can play that game. I wasn't just sitting around letting her mess with me, I was keeping my eyes open, noticing stuff she didn't want anybody to see. And oh boy, did I see some weird things. Like, every Tuesday night, Karen would vanish. Poof, gone. I'd be on my porch, maybe reading a book or sipping some juice, and I'd see her sneak out of her house when it got dark. She'd hop in her car, all quiet like, and drive off. Then, a couple hours later, she'd come back with these shady-looking bags. They weren't grocery bags or shopping bags, they were big, lumpy, and kinda dirty, like trash bags, but heavier. She'd carry them into her garage real fast, looking around to make sure nobody saw her. What was in those bags? I had no clue, but it was fishy, super fishy. And that's not all. She got real jumpy if anyone went near her garage. One day, Timmy, you remember him, the kid with the bike, was riding down the street and accidentally tossed his ball too hard. It rolled right up to Karen's garage door and stopped. Before Timmy could even get off his bike to grab it, Karen burst out of her house like a tornado. Get away from there, she yelled, running over and snatching the ball. She threw it back at him so fast he almost fell off his bike. Stay away from my garage, she screeched, her face all red and sweaty. Timmy pedaled off, scared again, and I watched from my yard, thinking, whoa, what's she hiding in there? It was weird, right? Super weird. So I started jotting it down, everything I saw, in my own little notebook. Tuesday night trips, shady bags, freaking out about the garage, I wrote it all down, keeping my own list. Karen wasn't the only one who could play detective. Weeks went by, and it was like a game now. She'd mess with me, and I'd watch her back. She kept leaving those notes, last warning. Take it down. and I kept throwing them away. She'd glare at Norman every time she walked by, muttering about rules and fines, and I'd just wave and smile. One time, she even stomped over and said, "You're gonna regret this, Jake. That gnome's a problem." I leaned on my porch railing, all cool, and said, "He's not the problem, Karen. Maybe you are." Her eyes got huge, and she huffed off again. I wasn't scared not one bit because I had that secret, that big thing she didn't know about. It was like a shield, keeping me calm while she got madder and madder. But then came the big move the moment everything started to shift. It was a regular old morning, all quiet and sleepy. I was still in bed, dreaming about pizza or something fun, when I heard this loud noise: wee-oh-oh, wee-oh-oh. Sirens. My eyes popped open, and I jumped up, running to my window. I pulled the curtain back, and holy cow, there were red and blue lights flashing outside. Not just a little flash, big, bright ones, spinning like crazy. I rubbed my eyes and looked closer. 2 cop cars were parked right in front of Karen's house. 2 of them. Their lights were going wild, lighting up the whole street, and I could hear radios crackling with voices. I peeked out more, and there she was, Karen, standing on her perfect lawn in her fluffy slippers, yelling at the cops. She had her arms waving like a windmill, up and down, back and forth, like she was trying to fly away. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, loud enough for me to hear through my window. "You can't do this." The cops didn't look happy, they just stood there, arms crossed, talking to her in low voices I couldn't make out. Neighbors started poking their heads out too. Mr. Jenkins on his porch, Mrs. Lopez by her tomatoes, all watching this big show. I grabbed my coffee mug, still in my pajamas, and leaned on my windowsill, thinking, what's she done now? Karen was always causing trouble, but cop cars. That was next level crazy. Here's the twist, though, this is where it gets good. Those cops weren't there because of my gnome, yet. Nope, it wasn't about Norman or me at all, at least, not at first. Something bigger was brewing, something way huger than her silly fight with me. I sipped my coffee, watching her yell and wave, and my brain started spinning. What's going on? I thought. Is it those Tuesday night trips? The shady bags? Something in that garage? I didn't know yet, but I could feel it. Something wild was coming, and I was right in the middle of it. What do you think the cops were after? Go ahead, guess. Was it something sneaky? Something bad? Hang tight, because it's about to get wild, really wild. Let's slow down a sec, because I want you to picture this morning. The sun was just coming up, all pink and soft in the sky. The birds were still chirping, but now those sirens were louder: wee-oh-oh, mixing with Karen's yelling. Her perfect lawn, usually so neat with its clipped grass and bright flowers, looked funny with those big cop cars parked on the curb. One officer was writing something on a pad, while the other stood by the car, talking into a radio. Karen's fluffy slippers were pink, and her hair was all messy from sleep, which made me giggle a little. She didn't look so tough now, just loud and mad. I kept watching, my coffee getting cold in my hand, and started connecting the dots. All those weird things I'd seen her sneaking off, those bags, the garage freakouts, maybe they weren't just weird. Maybe they were clues. I'd been writing them down for weeks, and now cops were here? It couldn't be a coincidence, right? My secret, that big thing I've been teasing, was still safe, still hidden, but it was starting to feel like the perfect time to use it. Karen had no idea what was coming, and I was ready to sit back and watch it all unfold. So there I was, at my window, Norman still grinning outside by the porch, while Karen shouted at the cops like a crazy lady. The neighborhood was waking up, people whispering to each other, and I could feel the tension building, like when you're waiting for a big surprise at a party. Something bigger was brewing, and I had a front row seat. What was it? Oh, you're gonna love this, I promise. Just stick with me, because this story's about to take off like a rocket, and you won't believe what happens next. Okay, buckle up, because this is where everything goes bananas. The next day after those cop cars showed up at Karen's house, she totally lost it. I mean, she flipped out like a volcano exploding. It was a sunny morning, all bright and warm, and I was just chilling on my porch with Norman, my little garden gnome buddy. He was sitting there by the steps, his red hat shining, his big grin making me smile. I had my coffee mug in my hand, sipping it slow, enjoying the day. Everything felt calm until Karen came storming over like a big, angry thundercloud. She didn't walk, she marched. Her feet hit the ground hard, boom, 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 and her face was redder than a fire truck. She had her phone clutched tight in her hand, holding it up like a weapon. She stopped right in front of my porch, pointed at Norman, and screamed so loud the whole street could hear, "I'm calling 911 on that stupid gnome. It's a public nuisance." A nuisance is something annoying, like a fly buzzing in your ear, and Karen was acting like Norman was the worst pest ever. She shook her phone at me, her eyes all wild, and kept yelling, "You've gone too far, Jake. That thing's gotta go." I just leaned against my door, all cool and relaxed, sipping my coffee like it was no big deal. I looked at her, steam practically coming out of her ears, and said, "Go ahead, Karen. Make the call." My voice was super calm, not loud or mad, just chill. She blinked at me, like she couldn't believe I wasn't scared. Then she smirked that sneaky, mean smile she always got when she thought she was winning. "Oh, I will," she snapped. She punched the numbers into her phone, 9-1-1, held it to her ear, and started talking fast. "Yes, officer, there's a man here breaking every rule. He's got this awful gnome that's ruining the neighborhood. Send someone now." She kept ranting, pacing back and forth in front of my house, throwing her free hand around like she was directing traffic. "Hurry," she barked into the phone. "He's a menace." I didn't move. I just stood there, leaning on my doorframe, sipping my coffee, watching her like she was putting on a funny show. Norman sat quietly by my feet, his grin as big as ever, like he was enjoying this too. Karen finished her call, slammed her finger on the end button, and turned to me with that smirk still plastered on her face. "You're done, Jake," she said, crossing her arms. "The cops are coming, and they'll make you take that thing down. You'll see." She looked so proud, like she'd just won a gold medal. I didn't say a word, just took another sip of coffee and waited. Calm as can be. Why? Because I knew something she didn't. Something huge. Minutes ticked by, maybe 5 or 10, and then we heard it. That wee-oh-oh sound again. Sirens. A police car rolled up our street, its red and blue lights flashing bright in the sunshine. It pulled right up to the curb in front of my house, nice and slow, and stopped. Karen's grin got even bigger, her teeth were showing now, like a cartoon villain. She bounced on her toes, all excited, and pointed at me. "Here they come," she said, practically giggling. "Say goodbye to your stupid gnome, Jake." She was so sure she'd won, so sure the cops were here to back her up. I just watched, still sipping my coffee, not saying a peep. The car door opened, and a cop stepped out. He was tall, with a shiny badge on his chest and a serious look on his face. Karen clapped her hands together, like she couldn't wait for him to yell at me. The cop adjusted his hat, looked around, and started walking toward us. Karen stepped forward, ready to talk his ear off, but then plot twist, he didn't stop at me. Nope. He walked right past me, straight past my porch, past Norman, and headed for her. Karen's grin froze. Her eyes got big, like 2 round marbles, and she stammered, "Wait, what?" The cop stopped in front of her, crossed his arms, and said in a deep, no-nonsense voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk about those reports we got." "Reports? What reports?" Karen's jaw dropped, literally dropped, like in a cartoon when someone's super shocked. Her mouth hung open, and her phone slipped a little in her hand. She blinked fast, trying to figure out what was happening, and squeaked, "Reports? What are you talking about? I called you about him." She pointed at me, her finger shaking now. The cop didn't even glance my way. He just kept staring at her, all serious, and said, "This isn't about a gnome, ma'am. We've got bigger problems." That's when it hit, the big moment, the huge reveal. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing, stepped forward, and smiled at her. Not a sneaky smile, not a mean one, just a calm, knowing smile. Karen looked at me, her face all confused, and I said, "Karen, let me clear this up for you." I reached into my pocket, pulled out something shiny, and held it up. A badge. A real, honest-to-goodness police badge, with my name on it, Jake. Her eyes went even wider, if that was possible, and I said, "See, I'm not just Jake with a gnome. I'm Jake, the undercover cop who's been living next door, watching your every move. Boom. There it was, the secret I'd been hiding all along. The whole street went quiet for a second, like everyone was holding their breath. Then gasp, the neighbors who'd started peeking out their windows or standing on their porches let out a big, shocked sound. Karen's face? Oh man, it went white as a ghost, white as a sheet of paper, white as Norman's beard. She looked like she might faint right there on my lawn. What? She stuttered, her voice all shaky. A cop? You? Yep, I said, still holding up my badge so she could see it clear as day. I've been here for months, Karen, keeping an eye on you. And guess what? Those Tuesday night errands you've been running? We know all about them. Her legs wobbled a little, and she grabbed her phone tighter, like it could save her. I kept going, nice and steady. You've been pulling a little scam, haven't you? Selling fake HOA fines to people, telling them they owe money for silly stuff like blue mailboxes or tall tomato plants. Then you pocket the cash, stuffing it away in those shady bags you bring home. I've been building a case on you this whole time, and the cops already had your number before you even dialed 911. The cop standing next to her nodded, his face still serious. That's right, ma'am, he said. We got reports from folks all over the neighborhood, people you've been scamming. We were already coming to talk to you when you made that call. Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water, but no words came out. She was caught totally, completely caught. And me? I just stood there, my badge gleaming in the sun, feeling pretty good about it all. Let's back up a bit, because I want you to really see this moment. Picture it, me on my porch, Norman by my side, that cop car flashing its lights, and Karen standing there like her whole world just flipped upside down. Neighbors were everywhere now, Timmy peeking from his yard, Mr. Jenkins leaning on his porch railing, Mrs. Lopez holding a tomato and staring. They'd all heard me say it, undercover cop. That's what I was. Not just some guy who liked gnomes, I was a secret police officer, sent to live here and watch for trouble. And Karen? She was the trouble I'd been watching. See, it all started months ago, before I even moved in. The real police got complaints about someone in this neighborhood making up fake rules and taking money from people. They didn't know who it was at first, so they sent me to figure it out. I moved in with my boxes and my gnome, acting like a regular guy, but really I was on a mission. Norman wasn't just a decoration, he was part of my cover, my way to blend in and look normal. Nobody suspects a guy with a goofy gnome, right? But while Karen was yelling at me about him, I was watching her those Tuesday night trips, those bags, the way she freaked out about her garage. I wrote it all down, took pictures when she wasn't looking, and sent it to my bosses. They'd been ready to bust her for a while, and today was the day. Karen finally found her voice, but it was all squeaky now. This is a mistake, she said, waving her hands again. I didn't do anything. He's lying. She pointed at me, her finger trembling like a leaf in the wind. I shook my head and said, nope, Karen. We've got proof, lots of it. Bank records, pictures, even some of those notes you left on my door. You're done. The cop stepped closer to her and said, ma'am, you need to come with us. We've got questions, and you're not talking your way out of this. Her smirk was gone now, totally wiped off her face. She looked around at the neighbors, all staring at her, and her shoulders slumped. But the gnome, she mumbled, like that was still her big argument. I laughed a real, loud laugh and said, Karen, the only nuisance here is you. That was at the mic drop moment. The crowd gasped again, and some people even clapped. Timmy cheered from his yard, yeah, Jake. Mrs. Lopez nodded like she'd known it all along. And Norman? He just sat there, grinning like he'd been in on it from the start. Maybe he was, he's a smart little gnome. Karen tried one last time, stammering, you can't do this. This is my street. But the cop wasn't having it. He took her arm, gentle but firm, and said, let's go, ma'am. She pulled back a little, still muttering, but he led her toward the cop car. Her fluffy slippers dragged on the ground, and her phone fell out of her hand, landing in the grass. She didn't even pick it up, just kept staring at me, her eyes huge and scared. I gave her a little wave, all friendly like, and said, see ya, Karen. The cop opened the car door, and she got in, still looking like she couldn't believe it. The neighbors went wild after that. People started talking all at once, loud whispers and excited shouts. "Jake's a cop. She was scamming us." I knew she was trouble. Mr. Jenkins walked over, his newspaper under his arm, and said, "Good job, Jake. She had it coming." Timmy ran up, his bike forgotten, and asked, "Are you really a police guy?" I showed him my badge and said, "Yep, buddy. Been one for years." He grinned so big I thought his face might split. Mrs. Lopez came over too, holding out a tomato. "For you," she said. "You're a hero." I took it and laughed. "Thanks, but Norman's the real star." And there he was, my little gnome, still sitting by the porch, his red hat tilted just right, his grin as wide as ever. The cop car started up, its lights still flashing, and pulled away with Karen in the back. She stared out the window at me, her face all pale and shocked, until they turned the corner and she was gone. The street got quiet again, but it was a good quiet, a happy quiet. The birds started chirping louder, like they were celebrating too. So that's the big reveal: I'm not just Jake with a gnome. I'm Jake, the undercover cop who took down the meanest lady on the block. Karen thought she could boss me around, thought her 911 call would scare me, but she had no idea who she was messing with. Those fake fines, that scam she'd been running, it was all over now. I'd been watching her every sneaky move, and today was the day it all came crashing down. Norman and I. We were the winners, and Karen was finally out of tricks. What a moment, right? The sun was high now, shining down on my porch, and I picked up my coffee again. It was cold, but I didn't care. I looked at Norman and said, "We did it, buddy." His grin seemed to say, "Yep, we sure did." The neighbors kept chatting, some coming over to shake my hand or pat my back. Timmy asked if he could see my badge again, and I let him hold it. "Cool," he said, turning it over in his hands. The street felt different now, lighter, freer, like Karen's big, bossy cloud had finally blown away. And that's how it went down, the climax, the big twist, the moment Karen's world fell apart. She stormed over, thinking she'd win, but I had the ultimate surprise. Undercover cop Jake and Norman the gnome, we were the team she never saw coming. Stick around, because there's more to tell: what happened after, how the neighborhood changed, but for now, just soak in that wild reveal. What do you think? Pretty awesome, huh? Okay, here's where it all comes together, the big finish. The cops didn't waste any time after I showed my badge and spilled the beans about Karen's scam. Right there, in front of her perfect lawn with its neat grass and fancy flowers, they grabbed her wrists and snapped on the handcuffs. Click, click. Those shiny metal bracelets locked tight, and Karen's arms were stuck behind her back. She didn't look so tough now, not one bit. Her fluffy pink slippers shuffled on the ground, and her face was still white as a ghost from my big reveal. I stood on my porch with Norman, my little gnome buddy, watching it all go down, and man, it felt good. The cop who'd been talking to her, the tall one with the serious face, held her arm while the other one started explaining everything. Turns out, Karen had been scamming half the neighborhood for months, maybe even years. She'd made up all these fake rules, silly stuff like fines for ugly flowers or wrong trash cans or even bikes too loud. Can you believe that? Telling people their flowers weren't pretty enough and making them pay her money. She'd walk around with that clipboard, acting like the queen, and trick folks into thinking they owed her cash for breaking her made-up HOA rules. Then she'd take all that money, thousands of dollars, and stuff it into those shady bags I'd seen her sneaking into her garage every Tuesday night. That's what she'd been hiding, piles and piles of scam cash. They found it all, too. While one cop kept Karen on the lawn, the other went to her garage with a paper that said they could look inside. They opened the big door creak, and holy cow, it was like a treasure cave, but a sneaky one. There were bags everywhere, all lumpy and heavy, stacked up against the walls. The cop pulled one open, and out spilled wads of dollar bills, ones, fives, tens, 20s, all crumpled up like she'd shoved them in fast. Neighbors started crowding around, peeking from the street, and I heard gasps. "That's my money," Mrs. Lopez said, holding her tomato tight. "She fined me for my plants." Mr. Jenkins nodded and said, "She got me for my chair being too close to the sidewalk." Timmy's mom ran over, yelling, "She charged me $50 for his bike." Everybody was mad now, pointing and talking loud, and Karen's head sunk lower and lower. The cops didn't let her wiggle out of it. They started loading those bags into their car, bag after bag, while Karen stood there, cuffed and fuming. She didn't stay quiet, though. Oh no, she started screaming, loud enough to wake up the whole town. "This is my street," she yelled, her voice all high and screechy. "You can't do this to me. I'm in charge here." She twisted and pulled against the cuffs, her slippers sliding on the grass, but the cops just shook their heads. The tall one said, "Not anymore, ma'am. You're coming with us." I couldn't help myself. I stepped off my porch, gave her a little wave with my hand, and said, "Not anymore, Karen." Her eyes locked on me, all wide and crazy, and she screeched even louder, "You. This is your fault." I just smiled and shrugged. "Nope, it's yours." They hauled her away right then. The tall cop opened the back door of the police car, and the other one guided her in. She didn't go easy. She kept yelling, "Let me go. This is a mistake." But they pushed her down onto the seat gently, but firm, and shut the door with a big thunk. The red and blue lights flashed on again, spinning bright in the sunshine, and the car started up. I watched from my yard as they pulled away, driving slow down the street. Karen's face was pressed to the window, staring out at me, her mouth still moving like she was shouting, but I couldn't hear her anymore. The car turned the corner, and poof, she was gone. Just like that, the big, bossy HOA queen was out of our lives. The second she was gone, the whole neighborhood exploded with cheers. I mean, people started clapping and whooping, like we just won a big game. Timmy jumped off his bike and ran over, pumping his fist in the air. "Yes. She's gone," he shouted, his grin so big it took up half his face. Mrs. Lopez waved her tomato like a flag and yelled, "Good riddance." That means she was happy to see Karen go. Mr. Jenkins folded his newspaper, walked over to me, and said, "Jake, you're a hero." He clapped me on the back whack, so hard I almost dropped my coffee mug, which was still sitting on the porch railing, all cold now. People who'd ignored me before, folks who just nodded or walked by when I moved in, suddenly acted like I was their best friend. Mrs. Carter from 3 houses down, who'd never even waved, came running over with her dog yapping at her heels. "Jake, you saved us," she said, her eyes all shiny. "That woman was awful." Timmy's mom hugged me tight, saying, Thank you, thank you. She scared my boy so bad." Even old Mr. Pete, who barely left his house, shuffled out in his slippers and gave me a thumbs up. "Nice work, kid," he said, his voice all grumbly but happy. I stood there, surrounded by all these smiling faces, and felt my cheeks get warm. "Ah, guys," I said, scratching my head, "I'm not a hero. It's no big deal." Then I pointed at Norman, still sitting there with his goofy red hat and big grin. "Nah, he's the real star." Everybody laughed when I said that. Timmy ran over to Norman and patted his hat. "Yeah, Norman's the best," he said. Mrs. Lopez nodded and said, "That little guy fooled her good." Mr. Jenkins chuckled and added, "He's the sneakiest gnome around." I grinned, looking at my little statue buddy, and thought, yep, you sure did help, didn't you? Norman didn't move or talk, he's a statue, duh, but that grin of his made it feel like he was part of the team. Me and him, we'd taken down the meanest lady on the block, and now everybody loved us. The cheering didn't stop there, though. Somebody, maybe Timmy's mom, yelled, "We should celebrate." And just like that, the whole street turned into a party planning crew. "Let's have a block party," Mrs. Carter said, her dog barking like he agreed. "Tonight." Mr. Jenkins clapped his hands and said, "I'll bring lemonade." Mrs. Lopez held up her tomato and shouted, "I've got food, lots of it." Timmy jumped up and down, yelling, "Can it be a gnome party? For Norman." I laughed so hard I almost fell over. "A gnome-themed block party? You bet," I said. And that's how it happened right then and there. We decided to throw the biggest, funnest party our street had ever seen. The rest of the day was a blur of getting ready. Everybody ran home to grab stuff, food, drinks, chairs, you name it. I stayed outside, keeping an eye on Norman, while people buzzed around like happy bees. Mrs. Lopez came back with a big basket of tomatoes and a tray of sandwiches, ham and cheese, my favorite. Mr. Jenkins hauled out a table and set up a huge jug of lemonade, all yellow and icy. Timmy and his mom dragged over a speaker that blasted fun music, boom, 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 and some kids started dancing right in the street. Mrs. Carter brought cookies, chocolate chip ones that smelled so good my tummy growled. Even Mr. Pete shuffled out with a bag of chips, grumbling, "Don't eat 'em all at once," but smiling a little. Then came the gnome part, the best part. Timmy ran home and grabbed some paper and crayons. He sat on my lawn, drawing little gnome hats, red ones like Norman's, and taped them to sticks. "Party hats," he said, handing them out. Soon, everybody had one. Me, Mrs. Lopez, Mr. Jenkins, even Mrs. Carter's yappy dog got a tiny one tied to his collar. We stuck some extras around Norman too, so he looked like the king of the party. People laughed and took pictures, saying, "Norman's the star." I stood by him, holding my lemonade. Mr. Jenkins made it super sweet and thought, "This is awesome." The sun started going down, turning the sky all orange and pink, and the party got even better. Somebody strung up little lights, twinkle, twinkle in the trees, making everything glow. The music played louder, and kids ran around wearing their gnome hats, giggling and chasing each other. Grown UPS sat in chairs or stood in little groups, eating sandwiches and cookies, talking about how mean Karen had been. "She fined me for my curtains," one lady said. "She told me my grass was too green." Mr. Pete grumbled. Everybody shook their heads, but then they smiled, because she was gone now, gone for good. I walked around, sipping my lemonade, chatting with everybody. Timmy tugged my shirt and asked, "Are you gonna arrest more bad guys, Jake?" I ruffled his hair and said, "Only if they mess with Norman." He giggled and ran off to grab a cookie. Mrs. Lopez handed me a sandwich and said, "You're staying, right? No more undercover stuff." I nodded. "Yep, this is home now. Me and Norman are here to stay." She smiled big and said, "Good. We need you." The party went on and on way past dark. The stars came out, twinkling like the lights in the trees, and the music kept pumping. People danced, ate, and laughed, and every now and then, somebody would yell, "To Jake and Norman," and everybody would cheer woohoo. I'd lift my lemonade glass and say, "To all of you," because they were awesome too. No more HOA tyranny, that's a fancy word for Karen being a big bully with her rules. No more fake fines or mean notes or yelling at kids. Just good people, good food, and one happy little statue sitting by my porch, watching it all. Late that night, when the music finally stopped and people started heading home, Timmy ran up one last time. "Jake," he said, holding his gnome hat, "you're the coolest cop ever." I grinned and said, "Thanks, buddy. You're pretty cool too." He hugged my leg quick, then ran off with his mom, waving the whole way. "Mrs. Lopez left me an extra tomato for breakfast," she said, and Mr. Jenkins shook my hand. "Proud of you, kid," he said, then shuffled home. The street got quiet again, just me and Norman under the stars. I picked up my cold coffee mug from the railing, it'd been there all day, and looked at my gnome. "We did good, huh?" I said. His grin was still there, big and goofy, like he was saying, "Yep, we sure did." I went inside, flopped on my couch, and smiled. Karen was gone, justice was served, and the neighborhood was free. No more bossy queen, just us, having fun, living happy. That block party? It was the best night ever, and it all started because of one little gnome and one big secret. So that's how it ended. Cuffs on Karen, cheers for me, and a party for Norman. The scam was over, the money was found, and everybody got to breathe easy again. Justice. Oh, it was served all right. Okay, you awesome people, we've made it to the end of this wild ride. Karen's gone, Norman's still grinning, and the neighborhood's happier than ever. But before we say goodbye, let's take a minute to think about what all this craziness means. What's the big lesson here? What can we take away from Jake, Norman, and that bossy HOA queen? Grab a snack, sit back, and let's figure it out together. It's gonna be fun and make you feel strong inside. So, what's the lesson here? Well, here's the first big thing I want you to remember: sometimes the quiet guy or even the goofy gnome has more power than you think. Think about me, Jake. I wasn't loud. I didn't yell back at Karen or stomp around like she did. I stayed calm, sipping my coffee, waving at her, keeping my cool even when she left mean notes or kicked over my mailbox. And Norman? He's just a little statue with a red hat and a big grin, sitting there by my porch, not saying a word. But me and him. We had a secret, a big one. I was an undercover cop, watching her every move, waiting for the right moment to show who I really was. Norman didn't do much, but he was my buddy, my teammate, helping me look like a regular guy while I planned the big surprise. See, Karen thought she was the strongest because she was loud and bossy. She marched around with her clipboard, shouting at everybody, me, Timmy, Mrs. Lopez, Mr. Jenkins, like she owned the whole street. She thought being loud made her powerful, thought it scared people into doing what she wanted. But here's the funny part, being loud doesn't mean you're strong. Sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who don't make a fuss, are the ones with the real power. I didn't need to yell, I had my badge and my plan. Norman didn't need to move, he just sat there, grinning, while Karen dug herself into trouble. So that's the first lesson, don't judge people by how loud they are. The quiet guy, or even the goofy gnome, might just surprise you with how tough they can be. And here's the second big thing, those loud, bossy types. They're usually hiding something. Oh boy, was Karen hiding stuff? All that yelling about Norman being hideous and my mailbox being wrong? It was just a big show. She wanted everybody to think she was perfect, the queen of the street, keeping everything neat and fancy. But behind all that noise, she was sneaky, super sneaky. Those Tuesday night trips, those shady bags, that garage she freaked out about. She was scamming people, taking their money with fake fines, stuffing it away where nobody could see. She acted big and tough, but really, she was scared of getting caught. That's why she got so mad at me and Norman, because we didn't bow down to her, and deep down, she knew her secrets weren't safe. Think about that for a sec. When someone's pushing you around, acting like they're the boss of everything, maybe they're not as strong as they look. Maybe they're hiding something like a lie, or a trick, or something they're ashamed of. Karen was loud because she had to cover up her scam. If she'd been quiet, people might have started wondering what she was up to. So when you meet a loud, bossy person, don't just give in. Look closer, there might be more going on than they want you to know. That's a cool trick to keep in your pocket. Loud doesn't always mean right, and bossy doesn't always mean brave. Now, here's the third lesson, the one that's gonna make you feel super smart and strong. Next time someone tries to push you around, just smile and wait. Yep, that's what I did. Karen came at me with her notes, her yelling, her smirks, even calling 911 on Norman. Did I get mad? Did I fight back right away? Nope. I smiled, I waved, I fixed my mailbox and kept going. Why? Because I knew justice has a funny way of showing up when they least expect it. I had my secret, my badge, my plan, and I waited for the perfect moment. When Karen thought she'd won, that's when the cops rolled up, not for me, but for her. She never saw it coming, and that's what made it so awesome. You can do that too. If someone's being mean, maybe a bully at school, or a kid who's bossing you around, just take a deep breath, smile, and wait. You don't have to yell or cry or run away. Be like me and Norman, stay cool, keep your eyes open, and let things play out. Good stuff has a way of happening when you're patient. Maybe a teacher finds out, or a friend steps in, or the bully trips over their own trick. Justice sneaks up, quiet and sneaky, and suddenly the mean one's the one in trouble. That's the power of waiting. It's like a superpower you already have. Let's picture it one more time, because it's so fun to think about. Karen's on her lawn, yelling at the cops, thinking she's still the queen. Then bam, I flash my badge, and her whole world flips upside down. The neighbors cheer, the cuffs go on, and Norman sits there grinning like he knew it all along. That's what happens when you don't let the loud ones scare you. That's what happens when you trust that good wins in the end. It's not about being the loudest or the toughest, it's about being smart, staying strong inside, and knowing the truth comes out eventually. Pretty cool, right? So what does all this mean for you? Well, next time you're out there in school, at recess, with your friends, remember Jake and Norman. If someone's being loud and mean, don't let it shake you. You've got your own power, even if you're quiet. Maybe you're good at something nobody knows yet, or maybe you've got a plan they can't guess. And if they're hiding something sneaky, just watch, they'll trip up sooner or later. Smile, wait, and let justice do its thing. You're tougher than you think, just like me, Just like that little gnome with the red hat. Now, let's talk about you guys, you legends out there reading this. What did you think of Karen's downfall? Wasn't it wild? She went from bossing everybody around to riding away in a cop car, all because she couldn't stop picking on me and Norman. Drop it in the comments below, I wanna hear what you thought. Did you cheer when the cuffs went on? Did you laugh when she called 911 on a gnome? Tell me everything. And here's a fun question, would you keep a gnome like Norman? I mean, he's small, he's goofy, and he's got that big grin, would you put him by your door or in your yard? Let me know, I bet he'd love some new friends. This story's been a blast, hasn't it? We had Karen being all mean and loud, me staying cool with my secret, and Norman just chilling like the hero he is. Then the cops, the badge, the party, it's like a movie, but better, because it's ours. And the best part? It's not really the end. I've got more stories coming, more wild stuff, more fun, more surprises. So stick around, you legends, because we're not done yet. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and let's keep the good times rolling. See you in the next story, me and Norman can't wait. Before we go, let's think about one more thing. Picture yourself as the quiet hero like me, like Norman. Maybe you're not the loudest kid in class, or maybe you don't always speak up right away. That's okay. You've got power inside you, power to be kind, power to be smart, power to wait for the right moment. And when someone tries to push you down, just remember this tale. Karen thought she could win, but she didn't. The quiet guy and the goofy gnome came out on top, and so can you. Justice is sneaky like that, it loves the underdogs, the ones who don't give up. So go out there and be awesome. Be the kid who smiles when things get tough. Be the one who helps a friend, or stands up quiet but strong. You don't need a badge like me, or a gnome like Norman, you've already got what it takes. And who knows? Maybe one day, you'll have your own story, where the loud bully gets surprised, and you're the hero everybody cheers for. That's the magic of waiting, watching, and being you. Pretty inspiring, huh? Alright, that's it for now. I'm heading back to my porch, where Norman's waiting with his big grin. The stars are out, the street's quiet, and I'm thinking about that block party, best night ever. Drop those comments, tell me about Karen, tell me about Norman, tell me what you'd do. You're the best, you legends, and I can't wait to see you again. Keep being strong, keep being sneaky smart, and keep believing in justice. See ya soon, served up big and loud, right on her perfect lawn. And me and Norman? We're the heroes of the street now, just chilling by the porch, ready for whatever comes next.